The dark water of Aboukir Bay, the seafloor does not look empty. Stone. This is not a shipwreck. It is not a single lost temple. It is the remains of a city that once stood at the edge of Egypt, where the Nile met the Mediterranean. Ships arrived, goods changed hands, rituals were performed, and power moved through water.
Hey, that city is silent. Its streets are gone. Its harbor is gone. The sounds of timber, rope, footsteps, prayers, and waves against stone have disappeared.
It left behind fragments, statues, inscriptions, anchors,
Walls and stones heavy enough to resist time, but not enough to remain on dry land.
From those fragments, archaeologists began to read the outline of a place once known.
Its Egyptian name was Thonis. To the Greeks, it was Heracleion.
For one city at the mouth of Egypt. A city that guarded passage, received ships carried rich.
What we are about to see is not footage from the ancient past. Instruction guided by traces, by what remains, what can be reasonably understood, and what must still remain. Thonis-Heracleion is not only a story of discovery, it is the story of a living port slowly turning into an underwater. And the question is not simply how a city was found beneath the sea. The deeper question is this: that we have to leave the seafloor for a moment. We have to imagine this same place before the silt, before the broken stone, before the water closed over it. Long before divers moved through this darkness, ships came here from the open Mediterranean.
Before Thonis-Heracleion became a ruin under the waves, it was a threshold into Egypt itself.
To understand Thonis-Heracleion, we first have to understand where it stood. This was not a city hidden deep inland, protected from the movement of the world. It stood near the edge of Egypt, close to the waters where the Nile opened toward the Mediterranean Sea.
Ship approaching from the north, Egypt did not begin with pyramids on the horizon. It began with
walls, mudbanks, low land, shifting light, and the difficult passage from open sea into the river system before moving deeper into Egypt. A place where goods, people, authority, and ritual passed through a controlled. Before Alexandria rose as the great Mediterranean face of Egypt, this older port carried a different kind of between two worlds, the river world of Egypt and the sea world beyond it. That position gave the city its. Imagine the approach from the water. A vessel leaves the open Mediterranean behind. The sea widens, then breaks into shallower, more uncertain passages. The coast.
Then the signs of a city begin to appear. Wooden hulls, stone structures.
Heracleion was not simply beside the water. It was organized by water. It depended on movement. Ships coming in, ships waiting, goods being transferred. Watching, priests carrying out rites, and the city translating the outside world into Egypt's own.
This is why the ruins beneath Aboukir Bay matter. An anchor is not only an anchor. In a plate column is not only stone. It hints at architecture, ceremony, and a city that needed to be seen from. At Thonis-Heracleion, the border between Egypt and the sea was not an empty line. It was a living. We look at the stones under the water. We are not looking at the edge of a forgotten settlement. We are looking at the remains of a
way that once received the movement of the Mediterranean before that movement entered Egypt.
The gateway is not made only of geography. It is made of people, vessels, rituals, objects, and repeated action. The city would have been heard before it was understood. Water against wood. Rope tightening under, shifting in the current. Footsteps on stone near the edge of the quay. Was the working surface of Thonis-Heracleion. Not a silent ruin, but a place of movement. Ships waited, cargo was handled, and the river world of Egypt met the traffic of the Mediterranean. It's found beneath the water allow us to imagine that movement, but only with caution. We cannot follow one sailor through a single.
Anchors point to ships. Vessels point to storage, exchange, and movement.
Ceramics and objects of use point to contact, to hands passing things from one world into a port is a kind of machine. It receives, it holds, it sorts, it releases. Heracleion, that machine was built not from iron, but from water, stone, wood, labor, belief, and
Imagine the city from above. Channels dividing the land, boats moving between them.
rising near the water, and the constant need to control passage through a shifting landscape. On edge, ships would have waited for permission, direction, or favorable movement through the channels. Goods would have been carried from hulls to storage, from storage to officials, from officials into the wider body of
But Thonis-Heracleion was not only a commercial threshold, it was also a sacred one.
Among the traces of the city are signs of temples, statues, inscriptions, and ritual objects. In the ancient world, movement through a place could also mean movement through authority. Near the sacred spaces, stone carried a different kind of power. Columns rose not just fixed names and meanings into stone, even as the land beneath them would one day fail.
Tension at the heart of Thonis-Heracleion. The city was built to control passage, to receive the outside.
For centuries, its stones no longer stood in the open air. They lay beneath the seafloor, separated.
Harbor without ships, a temple without voices, a gateway without a rival.
What survives today is not the city itself, whole and waiting to be entered. What survives are fragments.
And fragments demand a different kind of seeing. To understand Thonis-Heracleion, we have to return from the living port to the seafloor
and learn how a city can be read from what the water did not take away.
Underwater archaeology begins with patience, not with a city suddenly appearing whole beneath the, but with fragments emerging slowly from darkness. Carved surface, a block of stone, a broken column, a vessel pressed into silt, an anchor lying where movement once stopped. Each object is a clue, but none of them speaks alone. On Thonis-Heracleion, archaeologists had to work against everything the sea had done to it. Water had covered, mud had softened its outlines. Sediment had buried structures that once stood in open air, separated objects from their original places, and the city that remained was no longer a city a person could simply walk.
Be reconstructed through relationships. Where a stone was found,
Material it carried, which inscription survived, how an object related to a temple, a harbor, a channel, or...
This is why every detail matters. A statue beneath the water is not just an image of the past. It is a fixed point in a broken map.
A block of temple stone is not just architecture. It is evidence of a sacred space that once gave the city.
An anchor is not just a tool. It is a trace of waiting, arrival, and departure. Together, these objects allow a city to return. Not as certainty in every detail, but as a shape that can be responsibly understood. This distinction matters. What we can reconstruct is not the exact sound of one morning in the exact face of a worker carrying goods. Not the final words spoken before a building was abandoned. Those things are beyond the evidence.
Your pattern is visible.
There was a port. There were ships. There were sacred spaces.
Objects of exchange, authority, and ritual.
And there was a city powerful enough to leave a field of traces across the sea floor.
The sea did not preserve Thonis-Heracleion like a sealed room. It preserved it as a puzzle,
shifted, covered, broken, and scattered, but not erased.
That is why the city feels so close and so distant at the same time. Close, because
to stand before these remains is to look at the edge of what history can recover.
This lets us see the harbor, the sacred spaces, the movement of ships, and the importance of the city. But it also reminds us where reconstruction must stop. Every image of Thonis-Heracleion, silt, anchors, inscriptions, broken architecture, objects that survived because they were heavier than. And once those fragments are placed together, the question becomes harder to avoid. Harbor falls silent. Why did the city pass from the surface of Egypt into the darkness beneath the sea? The answer is not a single image of destruction. It lies somewhere between water. The city built at the edge of water is never separate from water. It depends on it. It moves through it. It grows because it also changes the ground beneath it. And at Thonis-Heracleion, the same landscape that made the city powerful may also have made it careful here. The evidence does not allow us to stand inside one final day and watch the city fall in a single, certain need to invent a night of panic, a lost ceremony, or a crowd running through streets we cannot fully reconstruct. Evidence allows is more restrained, and in some ways, more haunting.
Heracleion stood in a low, watery world. At the meeting point of river, sea, ground can weaken. Water can enter. Sediment can shift. And what looks stable for generations can begin, slowly or suddenly, to lose its hold.
Researchers have linked the city's disappearance to a combination of natural forces. Subsidence, unstable story should not be reduced to one simple cause. The more truthful image is not a single wave erasing everything at once.
It is a city standing on uncertain ground. A city where water pressed against stone. In the change not as spectacle, but as pressure. At first, perhaps only a lower edge of
where water stayed longer than before. A stone surface that no longer dried completely. A harbor line that became harder
for damage. Cracks. Tilting blocks. Structures pressing into ground that could no longer carry them. Not know each step. But we can understand the scale of the transformation. What had been a threshold into Egypt became a place the sea began to claim.
That once received ships slowly lost its voice. Stone that once marked authority sank towards silt that once belonged to movement became fixed in mud. And the city that had lived by water passed in tragedy of Thonis-Heracleion. Not that it disappeared into myth, but that a real stone, labor, ritual, trade, and human order crossed a boundary from which no city returns unchanged. Surface, other centers would rise. Other ports would take over the movement of goods, people, and beneath the water, Thonis-Heracleion remained. Not alive, not whole, but not covered by sediment, broken into fragments, and held in a silence that lasted for centuries.
A gateway became a seabed. A port became a field of ruins.
And a place built to receive the world became a place the world had to rediscover underwater. That is where we return now, back below the surface. Under the water, Thonis-Heracleion no longer moves. No ships enter its harbor. Under the water, Thonis-Heracleion no longer moves. No ships enter its harbor. Remains is quieter than memory. A statue rests where no temple crowd can gather around. Column lies in sediment, separated from the height it once belonged to. An anchor sits without a shift. Do not give the city back to us completely. They give it back in pieces. And perhaps that is why Thonis-Heracleion feels so powerful. It is not a legend floating outside, hitting more fragile and more real. A place that once lived through movement, trade, ritual,
and then became readable only through what remained.
It did not return its streets. It returned stone.
Turned anchors, fragments, inscriptions, and the outlines of a city that once stood at the mouth of Egypt.
Every object is both evidence and absence.
A statue tells us something endured. It also reminds us of everything that did not. Are gone. The sounds are gone. The living harbor is gone.
But the city is not nothing. It is a material memory beneath Aboukir Bay.
A place where the past does not rise whole from the water, but waits in fragment. And perhaps that is the most honest way to meet it.
Not as a solved mystery, not as a fantasy of a lost Atlantis, real port of Egypt. Way once alive, at the meeting point of sea, river, trade, and belief, and now held beneath the sea as fragments. Heracleion did not vanish completely. It became a realm the sea kept, and archaeology is only beginning